Question: what are the presuppositions used in ice core dating?
When you're dealing with ice core dating, right, you take a core of ice, so you literally drill down into the glacier, and you are looking at layers of ice. And you can see nice and clearly the layers of ice, but eventually you'll get to a point where, because of the weight of the glacier on top of it, because of the nature of the glacier, the way that it moves and shifts, eventually you'll get to a point where the layers are no longer distinguishable, even under a microscope. And so what you simply do is you measure your average from the ones that you can see and apply that measurement to the ones that you can't see, and therefore you extrapolate backwards until you get to a length of time, a time period in which your glacier actually formed. Now, I hope you can see the problem with this, because it's twofold. Number one, your presupposition, right, your assumption is that the present is the key to the past. You're assuming that what has happened over, let's face it, observable history, right, has always happened throughout the entire history of the glacier, and you're just simply extrapolating backwards. So that's your predominant issue here. That's your predominant presupposition. It's back to the one that is really applied to so much in geology, that present is the key to the past, uniformitarianism, right? You weren't there to observe how that ice started. You weren't there to observe that it was consistent. You weren't there to observe that the average is accurate. You are simply presupposing that the present is the key to the past, and therefore extrapolating it backwards. The other problem is that we know that ice forms in layers, and just like a tree ring, right, it's not actually a record of time, it's a record of growth. Now, the assumption is that it takes a certain amount of time in order to produce a certain amount of growth. Now, that can be a reasonable assumption in the case of the Old English oak tree, because we live in a country which has 4 distinct seasons, and for 2 of those seasons the tree puts on growth, and for 2 of those seasons the tree doesn't put on any growth, and so really you're left with 1 growth period per year. So it's a reasonable assumption to cut down an English oak and to count up the layers and work out the history of the tree. However, if you're in some other parts of the world, say Tasmania, and I'm sure that Craig can comment on this, you'll find that those growth periods can happen throughout the year, and there can be 2, 3, sometimes 4 rings put onto a tree in a single year, in which case your same presupposition that you could apply to the oak tree simply doesn't work on some of the trees from Tasmania. So you need to first of all recognize what your presuppositions are and be wary of applying them when there can be many differences. The same is true of the ice cores. If you assume that the present is the key to the past and that the average that is happening today has always happened, you certainly do come to a date of many thousands to hundreds of thousands of years for some of these ice cores. But the reality is, and this is well known in the secular literature, there is an assumption there that you have to apply the present to the past in order to get an answer of hundreds of thousands of years.